everyone. Thanks for joining us for a special version of the Kent Free Library Children's Show. This month, we're theming the show for Black History Month. Black History Month happens every February, and it's when people in the United States celebrate the achievements and history of African Americans. We hope you enjoy our show.
Now let's read a book called A Computer Called Catherine. It's about a woman named Katherine Johnson who worked for NASA. Everywhere she went, Katherine counted. She counted her steps to church. She counted the plates on the dinner table. She even tried counting the stars in the sky. Most important of all, Katherine counted the days until she could start school. Finally, at age 5, she followed her brother hundreds of steps to the 2-room schoolhouse. An excellent student, Katherine devoured thick books and added numbers at the speed of light, so the teacher decided she would skip 1st grade and start in 2nd. But Katherine was such a fast learner, she later skipped 5th grade too, and before you could say mathematician magician, she was a grade ahead of her older brother. Katherine loved math because it was easy to see if an answer was right or wrong. Meanwhile, most everyone in town was arguing about right and wrong. Some people said it was wrong for children with different skin colors to attend the same school. Others said it wasn't right for women to work at the same jobs as men. Their arguments seemed wrong to Katherine, as wrong as 5 plus 5 equals 12. Do you know what 5 plus 5 really does equal? She believed everyone would be treated the same, so she kept working hard in school and dreamed of a future when all people would have equal rights. Katherine finished 8th grade when she was only 10 years old, but her town didn't have a high school for Black students. Determined to keep learning, she counted the dusty miles, 120 in all, as her family moved closer to a school she could attend. There she took an exciting math class called geometry. She learned how points and lines made shapes, triangles, trapezoids, and perfect parallelograms. And her love for math grew exponentially. At 15, Katherine started college. She flew through every math class at West Virginia State, so a professor taught harder classes just for her. In advanced geometry, she plotted points on a graph. When she connected the points, they created a beautiful U-shaped curve called a parabola. It was love at first sight. After graduation, Katherine became a math teacher. Back then, people said women could only be teachers or nurses. Katherine knew that was wrong as 10 minus 5 equals 3. That's not right either. Do you know what 10 minus 5 is? She believed women could be anything, scientists, lawyers, or mathematicians. She set out to prove it. Katherine discovered a research center in Virginia that was hiring women mathematicians. They were called computers because they made calculations that helped the men engineers design airplanes and flight plans. To Katherine, it added up to the perfect job. All day long, she punched buttons on a calculator, just like the other computers. She solved long math equations, just like the other computers. She wrote answers on a huge data sheet, just like the other computers. But Katherine wasn't like the other computers. She asked questions, lots of questions. What were her calculations used for? Why were they important? How did her answers help design airplanes and flights? The men engineers noticed the woman who asked intelligent questions and how quickly she solved difficult math problems. So they asked Katherine to join their space team. Its mission, send America's first astronaut into space. Katherine said yes. Then she discovered that women weren't allowed to attend the group's meetings. She knew this was wrong as 5 times 5 equals 20. So that one's also wrong. Do you know what 5 times 5 actually equals? So she asked if she could go. Women don't ever go to those, the engineers replied. Is there a law against it? Katherine asked. No. So Katherine showed up at the next meeting, ready to work. Astounded by her geometry skills, the team asked her to calculate when America's first space flight should blast off. Katherine agreed, but first she asked questions like, where should the rocket splash down? How high should it fly? When should it land? With that information, Katherine carefully computed the rocket's flight path, a beautiful U-shaped curve. Next, she worked backward to figure out the time it should blast off. Then she began counting the days until launch. On May 5th, 1961, Alan Shepard blasted off. Following Catherine's flight path, he soared into the silvery sky. 15 minutes later, he splashed down in the Atlantic Ocean, right on schedule and right on target. Soon, Americans began dreaming of a longer flight around the entire Earth. To figure out the math for this long, complicated trip, engineers decided to use their new room-sized computer that worked much faster than people. But astronaut John Glenn trusted Catherine more than the machine. He wouldn't step 1 foot onto the rocket until she said the computer's calculations were correct. Happy to help, Catherine checked every number. On February 20th, 1962, John Glenn became the first American to orbit Earth. Then people began wondering if an astronaut could travel all the way to the moon. Both the Soviet Union and the United States wanted to be the first to land there and win the space race. Catherine knew this flight was incredibly long and dangerous. Every calculation would have to be perfect. One math mistake and the rocket would zoom right past the moon. As NASA's computer hummed and computed a flight path to the moon and back, Catherine went to work too, double-checking the machine's calculations. But this was the most complicated geometry problem she'd ever seen. One of the points, the spacecraft, was flying incredibly fast. Her target, the moon, was constantly circling the Earth while spinning. Some people thought the problem was too difficult to solve, but Catherine knew that was wrong. As wrong as 25 divided by 5 equals 4. All right, do you know what 25 divided by 5 actually is? She calculated and computed, she plotted and planned. She created a bold, brave path all the way to the moon and back. 10, 9, ignition sequence starts. Heart racing, Catherine leaned close to the small television screen. 7, 6, 5. She held her breath as powerful flames exploded on the launch pad. 4, 3, 2, 1, liftoff. The rumbling rocket slowly rose above the ground, above the smoke, above the clouds, and then disappeared into ink-black space. 4 days later, as Neil Armstrong took his first steps on the moon, Catherine smiled and began to count. Girls are capable of doing everything men are capable of doing. If you want to know, ask a question. There's no such thing as a dumb question. And those last 2 lines are from Katherine Johnson herself. The end. For those of you who were following along with the book and were wondering about the correct answers to those math problems, I have them right here for you. So on the page where it says 5 plus 5 equals 12, 5 plus 5 actually equals 10. On the page where it says 10 minus 5 equals 3, 10 minus 5 actually equals 5. On the page that says 5 times 5 equals 20, 5 times 5 actually equals 25. And on the page that says 25 divided by 5 equals 4, 25 divided by 5 actually equals 5.
Thanks for sharing that book with us, Miss Kaylee. Next up, we're going to play a game. I'm going to show you a slide that has 3 facts and 2 pictures. These clues and these pictures are going to help you determine which famous person in history or from today that I'm talking about. Let's get started.
I was the first African American student to attend an all-white school in Louisiana. I was born in 1954. Norman Rockwell, a famous painter, made a painting about me. I am Ruby Bridges. I am a well-known jazz musician. I got my nickname Duke from my classmates because I had good manners. I received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Recording Academy. I am Duke Ellington. I was the first African American woman in space. I was born in Alabama in 1956. I went to college when I was 16 years old. I am Mae Jemison.
I graduated from St. Vincent St. Mary High School. I have played for the U.S. Olympic basketball team. I began playing basketball professionally in 2003. I am LeBron James. I am an American gymnast. I won 5 medals in the 2016 Olympics. I was the first African American woman to win gold in an all-around event. I am Simone Biles. In 1895, I moved to Cleveland, Ohio. I was the first African American man to own a car in Cleveland. I invented the traffic signal. I am Garrett Morgan. How many did you get right? I hope you enjoyed playing our fun game.
It's time for our craft. But before we get started, I'd like to give a little backstory on why we are doing this specific craft for our Black History Month show. Our craft today is inspired by this man. His name is Garrett Morgan. He was born in Kentucky, then moved to Cincinnati, Ohio, and then moved up near us to Cleveland, which is pretty cool. He was an inventor, an entrepreneur, and a hero. He started off as a janitor working in a factory. Then his boss caught him fixing the sewing machines that were used in the factory and promoted him to a machinist. After that, he opened his own factory and started making women's clothes himself. Inspired by a local fire, you can see him carrying his safety hood here. He designed and invented and patented a safety hood for men to wear into fires so that they could breathe the air that stayed low, the fresh air, as the smoke rose in the fire, and they were able to go into the fires to save people. Then, after witnessing a horrific crash, he invented the first, I'm going to show you the picture, safety light, which inspired the traffic lights that we have today. Now it looks a little different. This is what his actually looked like. I'm going to show you a picture of his patent. It looks a little different than what we have today, but it inspired the traffic lights that we use today. So for our craft, we are going to make traffic light necklaces. Let's get started. Thanks for crafting with me today. If you'd like to learn more about Garrett Morgan, you can place this book on hold at our library. It's called The Unstoppable Garrett Morgan. Check it out today and learn about this fantastic local hero.
Now let's read a book called What Do You Do with a Voice Like That? About Congresswoman Barbara Jordan. Growing up in the 5th Ward of Houston, Texas, Barbara Jordan stood out. She may have looked like other kids, she may have acted like other kids, but she sure didn't sound like other kids, not with that voice of hers. That voice, that big, bold, booming, crisp, clear, confident voice. It caused folks to sit right up, stand up straight, and take notice. What do you do with a voice like that? Well, first you give that voice something to say. Barbara recited poetry at church. She memorized speeches for school. She entered oratory contests and in 1952 won a trip to Chicago, the first time she'd ever left Texas. Barbara was proud of herself and proud of her voice. It was laying a path for her. But where would that path lead? On Sunday evenings, Barbara would talk things over with Grandpa Patton. Would she become a preacher like her father and like her mother could have been? Or a teacher like those who encouraged her at Phyllis Wheatley High? Or perhaps she'd become a lawyer. Not many Black women had achieved that, but one who had done so visited Wheatley and gave a stirring speech. Barbara was inspired. Being a lawyer would be a marvelous use of her voice, But before that can happen, what's the next thing that you do with a voice like that? You give it more knowledge to work with. College opened Barbara's eyes to how the country was changing and how it wasn't. She learned how to find facts for herself, debate important issues, defend good ideas, and dismantle bad ones. Her law classes challenged her more than anything she'd known. She hid her struggles from her classmates, studying long and hard and out of sight. And when she graduated, yes, Barbara became a lawyer. But being a lawyer bored her. She used a typewriter and pen a lot more than she did her voice, and there was not enough work to occupy her time or her mind. There was, however, lots of political work that needed doing. In 1960, America was not as free or as fair a place as it could be. Barbara believed that politics could change that, so she got involved. One night, a scheduled speaker was absent, and Barbara was asked if she would fill in. She said yes. The audience loved her. They trusted her. Most important, they were inspired to do something, to get out and vote, and to help round up others and get them to vote. Her voice had made a difference. Barbara, bitten by the political bug, as she later put it, knew just what to do with a voice like that. She put it to public use. Barbara wanted more justice and more equality. She knew that these things began with more citizens sharing their own voices with their representatives in government. To make sure they got heard, Barbara decided to run for political office herself. So she ran, and she lost. And she ran, and she lost. I have no intention of being a 3-time loser, she said. So she ran a 3rd time. This time she won. As a Texas state senator, Barbara represented the people she'd grown up among. Before, she'd merely trusted in the political system. Now she was a part of it. When it works right, the system makes laws that improve our lives, and it makes sure that the people, both the powerful and the powerless, follow those laws. Changes to our laws sometimes come from raising a ruckus outside the system, but Barbara's way was to make change from within. Sometimes that change, such as higher pay for farm laborers and more aid for people who got hurt at work, took place in public through debates on the Senate floor. Sometimes it didn't. Barbara got to know the other senators as individuals, and despite their differences, they came to relate to her in the same way. When each listened to what the other had to say, they could hear what was important to them, and it helped them all do a better job. Other Texans who had never paid any attention to a woman of color heard the wisdom in her voice, which helped them do better too. Well then, what do you do with a voice like that? You share it with the entire country. In her next election in 1972, Barbara moved up to the United States Congress in Washington, D.C. Soon came a troubled, confusing time for the nation. President Nixon, it seemed, had broken the law, and Congress had to decide what to do about it. On a TV broadcast seen throughout the country, Barbara used her voice to show them the way. She reminded her audience that the Constitution is the document governing all the laws in the United States and applies to all of its people. Then she explained in her big, bold, booming, crisp, clear, confident tone how the president's actions had gone against that document. My faith in the Constitution is whole, it is complete, it is total. And I am not going to sit here and be an idle spectator to the diminution, the subversion, the destruction of the Constitution. The Constitution, Barbara said, must be preserved. The president, Barbara said, must go. The president went. That speech made Barbara a star. She shone like a bright light in a dark place. Barbara would have loved spending more nights under actual stars, camping and singing with her friends, but the public wanted more of her and more from her. She delivered, battling to protect the rights of Mexican-American voters and others against discrimination. There were whispers and rumblings of what might be next for Barbara: the U.S. Senate, the Supreme Court. Could she possibly become Vice President Jordan? Who knew how high she might rise? So many people had so many hopes for Barbara. In her voice, they knew there was much to admire. How she spoke for those who had less power. How she spoke for those who possessed quieter strengths than her own. How she spoke for those who did not want to be limited by their weaknesses. But the public did not know that this last group included Barbara herself, who had been privately struggling with a nerve disease called multiple sclerosis since her earliest days in Congress. Nor did they know that Barbara had begun hearing another voice. This other voice was an inner voice. It instructed her that the right place for Barbara Jordan was not in any of the roles that the public had in mind. It told Barbara that the right place for her now was as a citizen back home in Texas. What would you do with a voice like that? Even as her body failed her, Barbara's mind grew ever wiser, and she heeded what she heard. She went home. There, she became a teacher. College students who intended to put their own voices to public use lined up for the chance to learn from her. In her classroom, you can bet that they sat right up, stood up straight, and took notice of the values she imparted: equality, justice, trust. And when the occasion called for it, say at a basketball game with students such as those she taught, students like Barbara herself once had been, she even used her voice to raise a ruckus. Barbara Jordan's former students still move among us, striving to do work that would have made her proud, hearing echoes of her words as they try to make life better for all of us. For when it has been silenced, what do we do with a voice like that? We remember it and we honor it by making our own voices heard. The end.